In every corner of America, there are stories of resilience, innovation, and the unwavering spirit of community. Stories of people and places transformed by the power of connection, collaboration, and a shared vision for a better future. This is the Community Effect, brought to you by NeighborWorks America.
Welcome back to Season 2 of the Community Effect, a NeighborWorks America podcast. I'm your host, Marietta Rodriguez. As you've seen people run through the program, achieve homeownership, what else have you seen that's been particularly transformative in addition to owning their own home?
Yeah, we sometimes have this false narrative as nonprofits that it's all up to us, that we need to do more. And one of the reasons and one of the components of flipping the script that we talk about is that if we sort of reframe the stories that we're trying to create in our communities and to focus on our neighbors and our tenants and our participants as the heroes in that story, that we sort of are able to remove these sometimes self-imposed limits on what's possible, because there's a lot more difference makers. It's not just up to us. And if we believe in our tenants enough to invest in them, there's so many stories of not being able to envision where this story might have led to. And I'll just give you one quick example. There was a refugee family a little bit earlier on in what we were doing. It was right before we actually had our merger that created the Neighbor Project, but they were being served by both of the two organizations that ended up merging. And they were a family of 8 living in a small apartment. And because they were a larger family, they're actually about a little under 40% of the area median income. And so I think most people look at a family like them and they sort of think, okay, they're going to need these services. They're going to need help. They're going to struggle. But what we found was, the parents didn't speak a lot of English. So they brought their 16-year-old son to interpret for them at our NeighborWorks organization, which had a different name at the time, but we were able to have him translate for the parents. They were able to move through a program, purchase their first home, expand their living space, begin to build generational wealth. And the amazing thing about this story is that this guy, Joseph, who was interpreting for his family, he was not just interpreting, he was listening and he was learning. And he began to say, you know what, maybe there's an opportunity for me. And this was sort of not too long after the foreclosure crisis where there were opportunities to buy homes. And he went out and he was able to purchase some properties, fix them up, and start renting to people that were in his community. And begin to sort of offer affordable housing informally in sort of a naturally occurring way, or in a way that he was really dedicated to. And then he went to a community leadership convening and got really involved with our organization, trying to get more people involved. We invited him onto our board. He started this youth soccer club, which is basically a private soccer club for low-income people, and they're getting to travel around to different states and having that experience that usually costs thousands of dollars, but they're providing it to low-income kids for just a few $100s. And so these stories of the kid of the family that we were trying to help, I don't know that I could have envisioned something that powerful or that level of leadership that would impact so many different lives. And a lot of it came from the opportunities that were opened up. He and his brothers all were able to go to college and begin to be real substantial community contributors.
But for that experience, right? We don't know what the counterfactual is, but certainly the causal link seems to be there.
And we've had him, of course, that story is so powerful, we've had him speak, and I think he certainly credits that experience with opening up opportunities for him and his siblings.
It's a great example. Thank you for sharing it. One of the things that you have alluded to a little bit, particularly when you were talking about resident services and working with resources in your community, is it seems that partnerships have been a big part of your work and your success, from working with the city of Aurora to receiving that gift from Mackenzie Scott's Yield Giving. Can you tell us a little bit about how important partners have been, particularly in scaling your model.
Yeah. Well, the Neighbor Project quite simply wouldn't exist without partnerships, not only because we're the product of a merger, but also because it really took people to believe in and be willing to invest in our program participants the way that I've described. We were able, in large part, to be able to provide the coaching and the counseling and the services that help educate and prepare people to become homeowners and neighborhood strengtheners and stabilizers, because we're a HUD-approved housing counseling agency. We get assistance from HUD because we're a NeighborWorks organization, and we get assistance from NeighborWorks that supports those services, because we have corporate sponsors who we've pitched this to and said, the cycle of disadvantage, the cycle of poverty can be really, really hard to break. But the opposite is true as well, that if we can start new cycles of opportunity and generational wealth building, that those are also really hard to break. And so we've been able to convince enough of a network of support to be able to kind of chart this different way that flips that script, that says we need to be prioritizing our tenants' outcomes and opportunities as much as we are prioritizing just access to affordable rents.
And have you seen that your private sector partners feel like this is good business for them? Obviously, it's critical to help communities thrive and be healthy, but have they recognized, certainly for Home Depot, for example, having more homeowners in a community means probably more people coming in and buying paint and toilet seats and products for your home.
Yeah, I think definitely our biggest supporters do have some maybe direct stakes, right? Whether it's banks or the Home Depots of the world, but also I think what's been really important to us is to be able to connect what we're doing to beyond maybe people who have a direct benefit. And actually, what's really true is that we all have a direct benefit when our neighbors do better. And I think that we've been able to show. I think a lot of people are frustrated with some of the approaches that maybe treat issues at more of a symptoms level than a root cause level. I think people are frustrated with systems that sometimes, even as well-intentioned as they may be, may in fact have opposite or unfortunate impacts of fostering dependency or other kinds of issues. And I think that there's really hungry for programs that are sort of saying, we need to take a different approach. And when our neighbors do better, our entire community does better. And we all benefit when we have more stable neighbors and we have more people with more opportunity. And so I think that's been our important pitch, is that this isn't just about, increasing your bottom line directly. This is about creating the kind of community that we all want to live in. And the only way to do that is if more of our neighbors have more opportunity.
I agree. That really speaks to our mission here at NeighborWorks. I want to just ask you a quick question about partnership and about investment in nonprofits. I know how catalytic some of the Mackenzie Scott money has been to members of our network and to the nonprofit community. The importance of unrestricted investment like that is so important. We saw, certainly during the pandemic, having a stable community infrastructure of nonprofits to be resource hubs for people was incredibly important. We've seen it when there's an environmental disaster, a flood, a fire. But what about for you and your organization? How important was that kind of investment?
Not having immediate metrics, deliverables, reporting gives us the time that we need to try new things. It gives us the space to innovate. I think that another problem, as I've kind of alluded to a little bit, is that it's really nearly impossible to do affordable housing at a small scale. And the resources and tools that are available tend to exclude some of the organizations that are closest to their communities, the place-based organizations, those that are really dedicated to those resident services, kind of first and foremost. And so having unrestricted capital that also doesn't need to be spent right away. We were able to create a $1 million reserve fund that is also kind of a pre-development fund as well, because you have to be able to show that you've got healthy enough reserves to be able to take on a large project. And I think that, very rarely do you have the opportunity to sort of not have to have something to report in 3 months or 6 months right away from what you've done with a large investment. And that sort of that lack of restrictions, that trust-based giving that has been just radically transformative to us. We always keep bumping into things of like, oh, if only we had that just a little bit earlier, this would have been different. But we're already having opportunities that just never would have been there because our organization is just positioned so much differently financially, because we're a healthier organization with greater reserves. We have the ability, a typical affordable housing project takes $250,000 or so just to put in an application and put together a plan. And most organizations can't front that. And so here again, there's this sort of ability to have our own patient capital, our own ability to kind of control and make a longer term plan that we think can make a longer and bigger difference.
It seems like it's giving you flexibility and ability to absorb some risk to really move some things. Thank you for sharing that. I have heard something I want to ask you about that's so impressive. I've heard that 1/3 of your staff have actually graduated from one of your programs. How has their lived experience, how does it show up in your organization?
Well, it's a great question. It's really important to us, first and foremost. It's also true roughly of our board as well. And so I think in both of those situations, having family representatives who have been through the programs and can kind of speak to that and who are believers in it. So maybe that's the first place it shows up. When you believe in something, you advocate for it differently. We have like all of us, the best kind of referral or advertisement is word of mouth. But we have board members and staff members who recruit their own family members to say, like, this is real. You should take advantage of this. And then they recruit their neighbors or their friends. And so I think that the first place that it shows up is in this sort of belief in the power of what these programs can do and kind of breaking down this. This is like we had another Cuban refugee family who did a testimonial for us. And he said, his first reaction was like, what's the catch with this program? Right. And then he realized there was no catch. And so I think that having those sort of personal ambassadors and advocates is a really important one. The other thing, of course, is that we hear about maybe the not so great things. We're fortunate to have this merger, and in that process, it was really helpful to have somebody who had lived in one of our units, gone through the program, and could tell us some of the things that we needed to adapt and change, and some of the limitations that we had unintentionally set. And so I think it's been an important part of our just the makeup, our approach, and our ethos to say, we need to be an organization that not only represents our community, but also knows and has experienced what we're asking people to participate in.
And certainly as your organization grows in scale, there are things that you're just going to have to do differently. And so being open to that feedback, I think, is really important. I understand that you're also pretty active in sharing lessons and the models that you've perfected here with other organizations. What are a couple of lessons that often resonate with those groups that you're talking to?
Well, I want to be very clear that I think most of the time when we're collaborating and working with people is that it's very much a two-way street, and we learn and gather just as much from interacting with other NeighborWorks organizations or other organizations as well too. And so, and I also want to be very clear that we don't think we've perfected the model at all, that we think that it needs constant and other adaptations, particularly as we begin to scale. And so one of the things that I really learned from in a consulting context where I was the consultant, but I felt like I learned a lot from was in working with another NeighborWorks organization in the Roxbury neighborhood of Boston called Madison Park Development Corporation. And they are a great organization. There's, I think, 1,300 units of housing, but they have a waiting list that is thousands of people long. And because the Boston area is so expensive and affordable housing is so difficult to come by, they have people who have exceeded 100% of the area median income, 120% of the area median income. They don't kind of get disqualified until I think they get to 140% of area median income. And so they're understandably wanting to stay in those units while they've got families who are at below 60% of AMI on, years, decades long waiting lists. And so one of the things that I think is actually a more compelling way of describing, the opportunity that we have was a grant that they wrote in the context of our consulting services with them around trying to bring a version of our model to help residents move into home ownership. They were able to get a local hospital foundation to look at this. And they said, in the Boston area, it takes us years to do one LIHTC development. And it's probably, $800,000 plus per unit. And when we build those new 50 or 60 units, we're able to move 50 or 60 people off of the waiting list, and we're able to help those people get affordable housing. But we estimated in this they estimated that they could help people move out of their units and into home ownership for roughly a cost of $30,000 per person. And so $30,000 is almost, it's 25, 30 times cheaper than it is to build a new unit. And you've accomplished the same thing. You're going to free up a unit for a family to come in, but you've not only accomplished the same thing, you've accomplished something much more meaningful. So you've actually helped somebody get into a sustainable position of building generational wealth. You've addressed a root cause and not just a symptom level issue, which is what the creation of new units does alone. And so, being able to work with them and see this issue through their context, for me, created almost a more compelling case for the need for innovation and shifting focus away from just creating more units and towards creating more opportunity for the families that we serve.
That's a great example. It makes me want to ask this next question. Given your experience in Aurora, given your experience working with other organizations, how does affordable housing as we know it today need to change?
I think that sometimes when we talk about our model, I can sometimes be so excited about it that I make it sound easy, or that I make it sound obvious. Like, of course we need to do this kind of thing, but it's never quite as simple as that. But I think that there's this, right now in this sort of state of upheaval and questioning and concern about how can we make our deals work that used to work, but now they don't quite work because of cost of construction and other things. We get focused on kind of the wrong goal sometimes, which is that if we're focused on building units, when there's, the Joint Center on Housing Studies at Harvard has said there's 22 million families that are housing cost burdened, but we're only building 100,000 units per year in a good year, 1 million in a good decade. We can't build our way out of it. And so we have to shift our focus. We have to change. And even if it costs a little bit more per unit, we can't afford to not be investing in our tenants. We can't afford to not be investing in opportunities to create more difference makers in their communities. And we can't afford to not be addressing root causes. And so maybe that's what I'd come back to, is that we need to really shift our focus away from treating symptoms. And when you're offering somebody the ability to live in their apartment, to afford their rent from month to month, from year to year, that's what you're doing, is you're treating symptoms. And another way of saying that is that you're offering subsistence. But nobody wants subsistence. People want opportunity. And I think that we have the ability to refocus on root causes and focus on creating opportunity for our tenants and our participants. And we've got to shift and change that focus away from the impossible goal of building our way out of an affordable housing crisis.
Yeah, you need to focus on the deal, but you also need to focus on the people that are going to be living in those.
The deals have to happen. That's for
true,
sure.
but-
So I'm not saying don't do those deals, don't look at those, but we have to figure out how do we serve tenants in a way that focuses on root causes instead of just helping them to be able to live from month to month.
It seems so obvious, but like you said, it's not as simple as it seems. I've
Never is.
enjoyed this conversation. I've enjoyed hearing your examples. The passion that you bring to this work is really incredible. So thank you for what you do, you and your team every day. I want to close with this. Can you finish this sentence for me? We can't afford to forget.
There are a lot of ways to finish that sentence. I think maybe the way I will try to finish it is going back to what we try to focus on all the time, which is that we can't afford to forget that all of our neighbors have something to contribute. They all have an ability to be part of the solution. We just need to believe in them enough to invest in them. I think it's easier sometimes to help somebody do something that they're capable of doing themselves. But that's disempowering. That's charity. And we don't need charity. We need to believe in our neighbors, believe that they can be part of the solution too. And I think when we do that, we end up being able to help ourselves a lot more than when we don't remember that our neighbors are probably the most important part of community development solutions.
Yeah, that's great. That change in orientation opens up a whole other list of possibilities and conversations. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed our conversation. I enjoyed so much learning about your model and your approach. Thank you for what you and your team do every single day.
Well, thank you. And I don't know that we say this enough, but I do think that I firmly believe that our organization wouldn't exist anymore without NeighborWorks. We had an organization that was part of the NeighborWorks network that merged with another one, and both of them, I think, really had significant sustainability options or sustainability issues, and we really believed in our model. But as I've said, I don't know that it would be possible without sort of the flexible dollars that we get from NeighborWorks and the training that we get and the ability that we have to be much better coaches to our clients. And so it's we're certainly grateful for being able to be part of one of the greatest networks that our country has.
I want to just thank you for sharing your story, sharing the work of the Neighbor Project. Your model really shows us how rental housing can be more than just a place to live, a place where people come home at the end of the night or at the end of their job. It can be a tool for financial empowerment, for stability, and as you said, for opening up different opportunities. And to our listeners, I want to thank you for joining us for this episode of The Community Effect. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future conversations about the power of place and the people transforming communities every single day. Until next time, I'm Marietta Rodriguez, and this is The Community Effect.
This is The Community Effect, brought to you by NeighborWorks America.